They called her the Black Widow of France. She poisoned her son's lovers and prayed for their souls before ordering another vial of death. She could smile as if she blessed you, and speak so gently that you would leave her chambers alive, but already dead inside. Her name, Catherine de Medici, Queen of France, to some, the mother of the nation, to others, the mother of death. Tonight, you decide. Was she a witch, a murderer, or just a mother turned into a monster by circumstance? In this story, you will learn why the mother of 3 kings turned her court into a laboratory of death, who became her first victim, and why it was a 16-year-old girl, and what she whispered to a priest before her death, words that make it hard to hate her. Before the night of St. Bartholomew, she told her son, the king, "Tonight, you will become either a saint or an executioner." What happened after? History tried to forget. Her life began not in golden glory, but in fear. Florence smiled only for foreigners and stabbed its own with knives. A girl from the House of Medici learned early, loud prayers are not proof of faith, but of fear. And the most dangerous people are the ones who whisper. She grew up behind monastery walls and rumors, bastard-born, too plain-faced, no fortune but a name that Europe hated for its wealth. When she was given to a French prince, she understood. This was no fairy tale, it was a contract, and she was the signature without a voice. The French court never accepted her. Her husband looked through her as if she were glass. So she learned to be silent and to see. Who whispered behind the columns, who came late from another's bed, who slipped off a ring before the audience. She never learned how to be loved, but she mastered how to be irreplaceable. In the nightly halls there was the smell of wine and sweat. In her chambers, parchment and ink. There she made lists of debtors, of mistresses, of enemies. When a lance broke at a tournament and her husband, now King of France, died with a scream the whole city heard, Catherine found herself alone. The king's mistress, the one who had humiliated her for years, wept the loudest, but her tears tasted of salt and triumph, not grief. Catherine looked at her and understood. Pity is a luxury for those who are not drowning. That night she felt what power truly means, not when people bow, but when you decide who will not rise again. She called for a man the court never noticed, a thin apothecary, a shadow in the corridors. He listened to her whisper, nodded slowly, as if hearing not a command, but a recipe. The next morning, the 16-year-old beauty who had wept over the king's body suddenly fell ill. The doctor shrugged. Weak heart, nerves, grief. Catherine only crossed herself. It was the first blood, but not the last. That death began a long list, but the autopsy revealed something strange. Traces of a substance that did not exist in all of Europe. Where did it come from? You will learn later. Catherine bore 10 children, but fate left her only 3 sons. She watched them like candles in the draught, burning and ready to die at any moment. Each would wear the crown of France. Each would prove too weak to hold it without her hands behind them. She ruled through shadows and spoke with the voices of men who believed they ruled themselves. She had learned from her enemies. If you want to live, feed your sons with fear, and those who feed them with love, feed them with poison. The priest who had blessed her wedding and crowned her queen disappeared a week after the king's funeral. No one searched for long. In Paris, someone always disappears. The horrors of his death would become known later. For now, Catherine learned the highest art of survival, to know whom to embrace today, so it would be easier to bury them tomorrow. From that day, they called her cold. She preferred the word alive. When Henry died, Catherine was 30. For the court, it was the age of fading. For her, the beginning. A widow at the French throne was meant to be pitied and feared. Catherine was feared more than she was pitied. She had 3 sons left to her, weak, sickly, dependent on others' advice and on women's hands. One loved the hunt, another, the dance, the third, the warmth of strangers' arms, and all of them carried one name, Valois. Every step they took could cost France its crown. Catherine understood, if she ever let go of power, her sons would not survive. So she became the mother who loved through control. She chose their friends, their food, their wives, even those who lit their candles. The court laughed, until it realized laughter was dangerous. A servant once said the king looked Italian. He vanished, as if he had never existed. Since then, even the wind whispered carefully in the palace. When her first son, Francis II, became king, Catherine looked like a woman resigned to her place. She wore black gowns, walked the halls with rosary beads in her hands, but everyone who dared to speak to her about politics left her chambers with trembling hands. She never threatened. She simply asked questions, precise, cold, the kind that made you want to confess. Francis was young, in love, and his wife, Mary, Queen of Scots, quickly outshone Catherine at court. Mary glittered. Laughter, poetry, music, gowns the color of wine. Catherine was the shadow in the corner, but it's always the shadow that controls the light when the light blinds itself. Soon, Mary began to meddle in France's affairs, to advise, to plead, to pressure. Catherine summoned once more that same apothecary, now with gray at his temples. "Do you still remember that formula?" she asked. He nodded. A month later, Mary Stuart lost her child and left France forever. Francis died soon after. "A weak heart," said the doctors, but those who saw the body whispered the skin on his chest had turned a strange shade of gray-blue. The deaths of Mary and Francis birthed rumors. They said Catherine kept a secret room beneath the Louvre, where alchemists mixed powders and oils that made death smell like lavender. Maids swore that at night her chambers smelled of bitter almond, and that she wore a ring with a hollow under the stone. Some said for perfume, others for poison. When her second son, Charles IX, took the throne, things grew darker. He was handsome, impressible, afraid, drawn to women and weakness, like a moth to flame. Catherine watched him sink into the arms of others, and knew, if she didn't pull him away from the bed, she'd lose the crown. So she did what no mother should do. She ordered her son's mistress, a young Huguenot girl, to be removed. They found the girl by the river. Officially, she had drowned, but servants whispered. A thin line of blood trickled from her ear. Since that night, the king feared water, and every time he met his mother's gaze, he looked away. She said nothing. Her eyes said everything. When the second son died, they did not rush to bury him. Doctors opened his heart and found it blackened entirely. Damage of unknown nature, they wrote. But in the royal archive, the one Catherine ordered burned before her death, one note survived. Too much lavender oil in His Majesty's chambers. The real danger did not come from the bedroom, but from the cabinet. Before Catherine's eyes, a new idol was rising for the king, Admiral Coligny, tall, dry, with a voice that never needed to shout, because everyone listened. He spoke to young Charles about glory, about the war against Spain, about the great campaign that would make the name of Valois eternal. To the king, it sounded like redemption. To Catherine, like a death sentence for France. She dreamed the same dream every night, a map of Europe burning, her cities in flames, and an empty throne. Coligny asked the king for men, for money, for time. From her, he wanted power. He smiled only as much as etiquette required. Behind the doors, his men were already dividing the future spoils. She tried to talk to her son, quietly, without threat. "War," she said, "is cowardice, dressed as heroism." He looked away, just as he once had by the river. "Mother, history is waiting for me," he whispered. "History loves orphans," she answered. 2 days after the wedding, a shot rang out in Paris. A bullet tore through a shutter on Rue Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois and pierced the admiral's arm. The city froze. Who fired? They said, a mercenary. They said, the Spanish. They whispered, her people. Coligny survived. And that was the worst part, because a wounded idol is stronger than a living one. He lay on silk pillows dictating letters to the king. The king wept beside him and swore his loyalty. That night, Catherine ordered every map, every report, every list to be brought to her. She spread them on the floor like a shroud. On one sheet, 2 names side by side, Coligny and Navarre. She understood. If that alliance hardened, her son would remain king only in seal and title. They would accuse her later, that she had guided the assassin's hand. They would say, it was her fear that pulled the trigger. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying. She was counting the days while France was still whole. Every delay, a tear in its seams. At dawn, she came to her son and, for the first time in years, spoke not as a mother, but as a regent. "Choose whom you fear more," she said, "God or civil war. God forgives, war never." He trembled. "If I give the order," he said, "they will hate me. If you don't," she said quietly, "they will forget you." And only when he begged her to. "Stay." She left. The decision was not made on the night when blood was spilled, but on this one, when the tears finally dried. Paris, August 1572. Flags, torches, laughter. The city was celebrating. A wedding between a Catholic and a Huguenot. A union meant to bring France. Peace. But inside the Louvre, Catherine walked back and forth, fingers tight around her rosary, and if you looked closely, the beads were not crosses, but tiny skulls. Her son, King Charles IX, was fragile, easily swayed. He believed anyone who spoke louder than his mother, and those who whispered of peace were already preparing for war. Catherine knew, if the Protestants raised their weapons, France would fall. If she struck first, France would drown in blood, a choice between hell and hell. She entered his chamber. He stood by the window, pale, trembling. Outside, the drunken shouts, the flicker of torches. "Mother, what should I do?" he asked. Catherine placed her hands on his cheeks. "Tonight," she said, "you will become either a saint or a butcher." Then she left. An hour later, by her order, or as they would say later, by her silence, the soldiers took to the streets. They knocked on the doors of Huguenots, and those who opened never had time to ask why. That night, thousands were slain. The river Seine turned red. By dawn, the city no longer smelled of wine, but of iron. Catherine sat in the chapel on her knees. She prayed while outside, women screamed and doors shattered. When her advisor entered, she did not raise her head. "The city is cleansed, Your Majesty," he said. She crossed herself. "No," she answered softly. "Paris is simply orphaned." Chroniclers wrote that after that night Catherine's hair turned white for the first time, and in the morning, while blood still clung to the cobblestones, she ordered a mass for the souls of all who died that day, and for those who had been forced to kill. Paris was silent. Some saw a saint, others the devil herself. But Catherine knew, without that night, her son would not have lived a week. A year later, Charles IX began coughing blood. He raved in fever and said he heard screams in the dark. "They're coming for me," he whispered. and his mother stood beside his bed, stroking his hair, as if he were a child again. Doctors could do nothing. His death was slow, terrible. His skin turned dark, his heart black like burned coal. "Cause unknown," wrote the physicians. Catherine only said quietly, "I did not kill him with poison, but with fear." After the funeral, she ordered 1,000 candles lit to burn for 7 nights. On the evening of the 8th, one candle went out, the one that stood before her portrait. She didn't just cut people open. She collected her instruments like a surgeon. Catherine had her own flying squadron, maids of honor who danced, laughed, and listened. Every nobleman had a weakness, and every maiden ears and memory. A rumor born in a bed would reach the queen's desk by morning, written neatly in her own hand, who owed whom, who betrayed whom, who wore a dagger at his belt, and who wore a cross instead of honor. Thus her power was built, where tenderness was a leash and secrets chains. Her world smelled not only of incense. Each morning, a Florentine named René climbed the stairs, her perfumer. He brought not perfume, but silence. One vial calmed fear, another silenced tongues, a third erased memory. Or so her enemies said. But when, before the king's wedding to the Huguenot bride, the girl's mother suddenly died. Paris buzzed for a week about the gloves with the scent of jasmine. Catherine prayed in the chapel, and in the markets they sold her story, like cheap wine. She wore black not out of vanity, but because black held more truth than gold. Mourning, for her, hid not grief, but decision. A black gown was her sign. I know who among you will be next. In those same years, an astrologer often visited her. He spread the stars before her, and she spread the map of Europe. From the stars, she asked not about the future, but about time. "How much do I have left," she would whisper, "to keep this kingdom from falling apart?" Now, the priest who vanished after her wedding. In the records of Saint-Germain-l'Auxerrois, they wrote, "A man of God without a name was found by the riverbank a week later. His fingers blackened, his lips marked with a pale burn. In his pocket, a torn piece of a letter, unsigned. The watchman swore he smelled of bitter almond. No one searched for the killer. Paris does not like questions answered by the river. She built palaces the same way she built intrigues. The Tuileries rose like a box. To hide her fears inside, in its halls, court ballet was born, music and steps, under which illusions die more softly. And yet in the end, when the music falls silent, only the click of her rosary remains, and the void, where the names of those she outlived, keep falling. After Charles IX died, the court grew quiet, like a tomb. "They say the Queen Mother has spent all her poison," they whispered. But Catherine knew. The true poison was never in the vials. It lived in her own blood. The throne passed to her third son, Henry III. Handsome, elegant, lazy. He loved the scent of perfume more than the smell of blood. He surrounded himself with favorites and pearls. France laughed, Rome fumed. Catherine did not laugh. She saw in him not a king, but a condemned man. She took a power in her hands again. They called her the old witch in black. She knew it and never denied it. Mornings, prayer, evenings, reports. One day, the old apothecary returned, pale, aged, hands trembling. He brought a box of dark wood. "My lady," he said, "I kept what you ordered destroyed. It is a sin, but also a shield." Inside, 3 small flasks, each engraved with the Medici crest, and a skull. Catherine looked and said, "This is all that's left of my childhood." She ordered them hidden in the cellars. A week later, they found the apothecary dead. His lips blue. Beside him, an empty vial. The rumors flared again. They said she had punished him for betrayal. But in her private diary, found years later in a convent, she had written, "He was my mirror. When it shattered, I saw how much darkness lived in me." France was collapsing. Wars of faith burning again. Henry hid behind his mother like a child behind her skirts. And Catherine was losing one by one all those she had lived for. Of 10 children, none remained. When her last son died, she walked into the corridor lined with portraits. She lifted her black veil and said softly, "This is my line, and this is my sin." She hardly ate, lived on herbs and ink. She wrote letters no one read. In one of them she confessed, "I thought I was saving France, but I was only saving my own guilt. God gave me a heart, and I made from it poison." When the servants opened her laboratory beneath the Louvre, they found dust, books, glass bottles. In one, a thick amber liquid. Around its neck, a single word. The truth was finally revealed. The non-existent poison was a remedy, a cure made by Florentine monks to save children from the plague. It was meant to heal. In her hands, salvation had become a weapon. "So, I was killing with medicine," she said quietly, and for the first time in years, she smiled. "That's why God never closed my eyes." She died in the winter of 1589. All night she begged the priest not to grant her absolution. "Do not cleanse my soul," she said. "Let God see that I am not hiding." The chronicles say, for 3 days after her death, the Louvre smelled of jasmine and bitterness. After her death, the court finally breathed out, as if the source of fear had vanished. But fear never truly left. It settled in the walls of the Louvre, soaked into the curtains, the books, the floors. Servants swore that at night they heard footsteps, soft even, as if someone was walking through the halls, counting those who had been forgotten in prayer. The crown passed not to her son, he had died before her, but to a distant relative, Henry of Navarre. And it was he who once said, "France owes her its life, though she died with a curse." In every chronicle her name stood beside the Knight of Saint Bartholomew, and the word poison. But few remembered that under her rule, France did not fall apart, that she forced kings to learn, raised cities after famine, protected art, that in her chambers she kept not only vials, but books, hundreds of volumes, guarded as if they were the souls of her children. She did not live to see peace, but peace came. When the bells of Paris rang not for blood, but for joy, no one spoke her name. But in the smoke of candles at Saint Denis, where her body lay beside kings, the priest suddenly whispered, "Lord, if she sinned out of fear, forgive her what was human." So who was she? Catherine de Medici, a killer who spilled blood for the crown, or a mother, defending her family in a world where women were never heard, only used? She went to her wedding in white, but history remembered her in black,